I'm sorry. Origin of language in my chat has been soying out for
Oh my
fucking
god.
Oh, this
45
guy.
fucking
Oh my
minutes.
god.
I
You have
put-
no
Why aren't you
idea.
guys talking about this? Why aren't you reading fucking this or that? It's like,
Oh my
dude, shut
god.
the fuck up.
Buddy, you
Stop.
have no idea. You have no idea.
Yeah.
Oh god.
Person
It's like,
Sunday is
bro,
the one
go
that got
read
me
a
to.
book. Why are you on Twitch? Go read a book.
Yeah.
So okay, so origin of language is an ex-patron of mine. He's a very strange fellow
Very mad.
who has dedicated his life to going from drama channel to drama channel, which he is acutely aware of, the existence of which he's acutely aware of. To say, why on earth are you drama streamers talking about drama and not reading Cormac McCarthy? And he will stay in these servers for days and days and days, just interacting with people, just fighting with them, to read Cormac McCarthy, to engage in the life of the mind or something.
Bro, this is my job, dude. What do you think?
Well, what's a little bit confusing is like, if you're so above drama, how did you find yourself here, and why are you staying here? Because
Yeah.
I don't see him leaving my chat and going to like.
You know what it is? It's because we're traders. Because it's not just drama streamers. He'll go into streamers chats where the streamers like know philosophy, and then he'll be like, "You're a trader. You should be talking about philosophy because you know that."
Actually
Okay,
true. Yeah.
Well, then, if that is true, Origin, and
By the way,
you know
chat.
you're Plato, then you know that the role of the philosopher is
Yes,
actually go
hipster.
back down into the cave and to take part in the honors of the people who are chained up in order to lift them out, which is what Aiko's doing, of course, which is why she's so confused about time, because she's just in another universe she's just a higher level of reality than us.
I don't know.
She sees
Well,
all things at
technically
all times at
high.
once.
Probably technically high. I am
There you
stoned
go.
now. I wasn't before, but now I am. Oh, also, I should probably tell YouTube what we're doing. Kid, can you TLDR what we've been doing
Sure.
/R?
Yeah. Tom Foolery wrote a document about how people perceive gender, and he is giving us a clear, articulate,
Irrefutable.
foolproof analysis of how gender is exists in the social realm, be its relation to biology and be its relationship to the social field. We are learning all about how Hulk Hogan, no matter how hard he tries,
We'll
will
never.
never be a woman.
Actually, we don't
I'm
know
being
that.
bad
We have
faith,
to
okay? I'm
ask.
being a little
We
bit
have
bad
to
faith. Okay.
ask. Okay.
Okay, look at Mike Wazowski. Okay, you guys see Mike Wazowski?
Who is that?
Mike Wazowski. It's. I'll
don't know
start
who
from
that
here.
is.
It's still a safe assumption to believe that a feminine person has a vagina, but isn't a necessary component to use the word woman. Just as if I said the word human, and you would picture a human-like person, you may define human as a living organism with human DNA, which may come with assumptions that this human has a red heart beating in their chest. But what if I showed you this picture?
Is this a person? Is this a real
Have
thing?
you not seen Monsters Inc?
No, I
for real?
haven't.
Are you for real?
Yes, I'm for real.
Okay, I can't do anything with you.
I'm too old, probably.
What if someone showed you this picture and then said that this person has human DNA? You would feel we've lost all meaning of the word, even though it fits your definition. Or if I showed you a human that meets the visual concept, but then told you that they have a green heart beating in their chest,
But
your
that's
assumption
not.
would be incorrect. But you would likely still call them a human because they look human. Just as you may assume a parent is a child's biological father, but you wouldn't stop calling them a father if you found out that the child was adopted.
What if a person had their face bombed off by a landmine or something like that, and they were like, they had a face that was equally unusual as Mike Wazowski's? There are some
would say
cases
that
of this
they
you can
were.
see on YouTube. They have like there's this one guy who has like basically nothing of his face left, and you can see like the before images before he had like surgery that sort of like gave him like something of a face, and it's actually really difficult to look at. Like, would you therefore say that he's not a human because he looks like something else with that, or like what would be sort of difficult to associate with immediately, because it's not a configuration that
Well, I think in that case it would be like static to like the idea that this person had a human identity at one point, right? Where like even if you took away all components and all you had is like a brain inside of a fucking in like a vat that was able to talk, you would say that this is still a person because they relate back to that historic identity of themselves, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Or would you
yeah.
say that this is just a brain? This is not a person.
Well, the reason why
This
I'm
is
getting
not a living thing.
well, transfer this over to gender. Like, let's say you have somebody who identifies later in life as a woman, and probably would have earlier in life if they were aware that being trans was an active possibility, but they still experienced dysphoria and all things associated with that, but they lacked the vocabulary to figure out what it was that they were and how to act on that. You would have a somewhat similar situation in which you would have an exteriority that in some respect does not actually reflect that history, but is also in some sense, I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm tired. We're moving on to like 9 hours. We gotta continue.
Yeah.
These assumptions can come with the concept or social role without making or breaking the idea altogether. Just as we can assume a feminine person has a vagina without saying sex and gender are the same thing, because sex usually aligns with gender. That pattern can't be discarded, but it also does not make them the same thing. You want this one for Sunday?
Sure. And last of all are pronouns. Do pronouns align with sex or gender? It seems the arguments I've made above for gendered labels would apply to pronouns. If using a pronoun doesn't communicate something that gives us utility, then why use them at all? If we cannot see the sex of the person in by far most scenarios, then we won't know what pronouns to use most of the time. One would only use her to communicate what others would assume it communicates. If a female has dressed in masculine clothes and put facial hair on her face, it's an interesting choice of words there, and now looks like a man, one would only confuse others to keep saying her, just as they wouldn't know who I'm talking about if I call this person a woman instead of a man. The words only give us utility, as words may be impressive to others, but isn't very helpful if I always have to stop and explain their meanings. If I keep calling a masculine person she or a woman, I will have to keep stopping and explaining why. If I use he or man, I will never have to explain why, because it is normal to communicate masculinity with those words. I think the assumption that words are only useful if you never have to explain them is a little bit strange.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. None of these concepts have rigid rules, and there will always be things that can be argued, but the utility is obvious. Fuck. Words don't have objective meanings. Dictionaries will tell you that they get their definitions based on the colloquial understanding and usage. That is how words have always gotten definitions and how language is created. Etymology only tells us how we got to a current definition, but cannot tell us what a word is meant to be defined as. If you believe words should always stay the same, you must not speak English. English is an assortment of other languages, and the words were stolen from other languages or created on the spot. The word cool hasn't always meant good, but it does today. Why? Because people started using it in that way, and because that's what others understood it to mean. That's all it takes to get a meaning from a word. Can you be wrong about whether or not one is a man or a woman? Could it be the case that the man actually means one with a penis and that we are wrong if we call one without a penis a man? If I call a car a bluff and everyone understands that when I say bluff, I mean car, then that is what bluff communicates and therefore means. If I say car to mean tree and everyone understands it to mean tree, then that is the meaning of that word. I am not using these words incorrectly, and I'm not wrong if what I'm communicating is understood. Words change and evolve over time. Language will never be stagnant. English speakers from 200 years ago would say that we are all wrong in the way that we use and perceive language. As a throwback, I think this is like the first time we're actually explicitly talking about linguistics in any sense. But the intro of this essay said that it was entirely about linguistics.
Let's see here. I work in linguistic marketing, but I'm not a linguist. Da, 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 da. I mean, he starts by explaining his reasoning why he's making the document as being his background in linguistics. How it aligns with the realities of language and biology, and there are a few common arguments I see on both sides of this debate. So I mean, it's not necessarily about linguistics, but like he sort of indicates that it's going to sort of heavily involve linguistics, which I guess depending on like the weight you want to put on this particular section is true.
Okay, I'm busting through the last. There's like
Yes, can
go
we
for it.
one
Please.
small portion left.
bust?
Again, I'm not making prescriptions as to how one should use these words. I'm explaining the concept of gender through a pragmatic lens. I'm not saying whether or not you ought to use one's preferred pronouns or who you should call a woman or a man. I'm explaining our current understanding, how this understanding aligns with reality, and the descriptive issues with the ways others want to change the language. I am also not denying in certain contexts words like woman will be adult human female, but it seems that usage of the word is the minority of the usage of the word is the minority.
No, that's the majority of the time. Adult human female is the majority understanding of woman. That's why we had to invent like new terms to refer to women who were not adult human females. That's why we had to differentiate them.
Yeah, I don't understand because like yes, like he made an outline of how like we have these social symbols which relate to femininity and that you're not going to be like checking for people's genitals when you're like referring to their gender, but like
For now,
the symbols that we're referring to are still like coming from and understood as coming from sex.
Yeah, when he says girl,
how attached it is, but
yeah. So when he says girl by these last two paragraphs, he literally means you there, minor with a vagina. That's literally what he's saying.
that is what he said before.
Okay. Gender has always been a binary in almost all cultures and has stayed the same through human history with small changes here and there. If we change these words to mean other things, we will invent new words to describe our current understandings of gender because the patterns do exist and will be observed and therefore will need labels to communicate them. No want or need will ever change that.
Hold on a second. You cannot write the last 10 pages and then cite the second sex and gender trouble. That is not allowed. No, Tom.
Gotcha. Wait,
what?
It's like don't even worry, dude. I already read these books. Okay. I know that you were going to say that I am misrepresenting or misunderstanding these concepts, but look, they're cited. I understand. Okay.
So in the bottom of the article, Aiko, he has a bibliography, and the first two things he mentions are The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir and Gender Trouble by Judith Butler. Tom, I'm sorry, there's no way in hell you've read these if this is the article you wrote. It's impossible. It's actually impossible. That's like
Wait, hold on. Just to FYI, for people on YouTube, we're reading Tom Fleury's doc that he wrote about gender, and we've done that for the past 3.5 hours, but he's banned on Twitch, so I came over to YouTube. If you are confused, I will upload the video to YouTube, and you can figure it out later. Okay, the end.
If you prefer Twitch, I'm not moving, so my channel is Kid on Twitch.
Yeah, go to Twitch.
Tom,
if you
DM
don't
me
like
on
YouTube.
DM me on Discord, Tom, and we'll set this up. Okay, you can come onto my channel.
Is he in your chat?
Actually, I don't know if he's in my chat, but I'm in a server, so I can probably just ask him here.
Who's been talking to Tom? Who's been organizing Tom?
He just said hit him up on Discord.
Okay, do that.
You still want
I'm
to
gonna
come
pee.
on?
Did I not go pee? Or did I pee?
Well, let's take 5 minutes. Let's take 5 minutes to walk around so we don't die. Grab water and coffee or whatever, because we've been going for a while. Then we'll bring Tom on, because we have no idea how long that's going to go. So let's do that. We'll come back in 5, and we'll bring Tom. Sound good?
Okay, cool.
Yeah, cool.
Cool. Okay, I didn't pee at Jesus. All right. Hey, Tom.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Where? How's it going, guys?
It's going swell. How are you?
Doing well.
Good.
Sound? Is it going swell? Kid has to go throw up. Was it that bad?
No, I was making a joke about Aiko.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, what? What about me?
Oh.
What was it? The little girl vaginas or something? That was funny. That was a funny line. I appreciated it.
We'll wait for Kid to come back first. Mostly because I've been going for like 8 hours and 45 minutes, and I'm so done. Um,
You don't have anything to say about like
well, I want
Illuminati?
to wait till about Illuminati.
How was that for you?
That was hell. That was one of the
Yeah.
most like physically distressing things to watch ever. She's pure evil. Like, dear God.
Creep show art, basically. Tom, any thoughts on Illuminati?
I don't know anything about the Illuminati, or is it? It's a person.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a person.
the pyramid
sorry, I
head
don't know.
lady talks about MLMs. She has so much lore. But yeah, she's a terrible person. The end.
Maybe
for
I'll
now.
have to look into that.
Yes, there are a lot of levels. Okay, back to.
All right, we ready to roll?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I have a question sort of right off the bat. I know you give kind of an explanation of why you wanted to write this in the first place at the beginning. Namely, you have like some level of competency with respect to sort of like rhetoric and linguistics and things like that, specifically in kind of a marketing area. You talk about you spent some time studying the topic of gender. You have a bibliography here with some like really interesting stuff. What though, to your mind, what is the overall purpose of this article by itself? Because obviously, like, I can understand, like, from your perspective as somebody who's like engaged in marketing, has an interest in rhetoric and whatnot, why you would want to try and purpose those towards this particular topic. But the document as is, what's kind of what are you sort of aiming at? Is this like are you kind of working out a problem as you go, or is this a general statement of where you concluded?
Yeah, it's so initially I'm not like an online person. I never have been. I got online like 3 years ago, like started streaming and stuff, and like, you know, that was like the first time I'd ever heard of something like Gamergate or anything like that. And getting into this space about 2.5 years ago, talking to people like Vosh, Vivian Wolf, and then like tons of far leftists. Every time I talk to a different person about gender, because I was meeting trans people for the first time. I was meeting, you know, non-binary people and all sorts of different people. And so I was really interested in like the idea of gender. I grew up in a Christian nationalist, like paleocon sort of household. And so this was all like very strange and interesting to me. And so the more I talked to people about gender, the more confused I was, and the more confused I felt like everybody else was. And so I found it incredibly interesting and wanted to, for my own sake, learn as much about it as I could, and wanted to kind of like document like the conclusion that I was coming to as I was going through this, to kind of put it all into like an idea somewhere.
Okay, so just in sum then, this introduction isn't necessarily like the introduction to a concluded piece of work. This is sort of just like a general statement of intent. You're interested in sort of employing the skill set that you developed in like your work in marketing or whatever, to interrogating these concepts, and this is sort of how you're doing so here. These are not your definitive statements on the topic. This is just kind of where you're at now, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's meant to be like a living document. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
I feel like that could have been a little bit more explicit. I wasn't sure what it was meant for, I guess. I couldn't tell which things were your takes and which things you thought were like just general I don't want to say truth, but like, do you know what I mean? Like what is, like, your thought on what is versus what it ought to be.
Yeah, I tried to steer away from what ought to be, but I think there's parts of it later on where I do a poor job of that, because I'm kind of I'm using like prescriptive language where I don't mean to. It's meant to say like the conclusion I think people ought to come to based on certain information. But instead, I don't mean for it ever to be like a moral prescription in any way. And I think that I do a poor job at that.
I don't think
I
that
mean,
I
just
thought
like
that.
in terms of like as like a philosophical or a scientific or an anthropological document, you don't intend to like be putting this forward as like a statement from your position as somebody who's competent in linguistics or whatever on what you have determined gender to be in an authoritative sense. This is just literally like, these are your notes. This is like you're working through stuff, you're figuring stuff out. This is sort of where you're landing right now.
Somewhat, it's meant to be like, it's meant to be almost like a persuasive essay.
See, that's the opposite of what I was talking about.
Yeah.
So it's meant to be like kind of a persuasive essay. So I want to be able to explain what I think gender is, not what it ought to be, and go ahead and address any arguments that I've heard about gender, so that nobody thinks like, oh well, here's this entire section that he just never even thought of, or he's totally missing, and so like he doesn't even address this. So I wanted to make sure like I kind of address each and every argument that I could possibly think of, so that there's some sort of explanation in there for it. So in that sense, like it's meant to be like a persuasive essay, not actually to like convince people of it, but to make it to where
Make a
my
case.
idea is coherent. To make a case for a coherent idea. Yeah.
When you cite at the bottom, I'm actually not sure if this is a citation or what, but at the bottom you put the Second Sex book by Simone de Beauvoir and Gender Trouble book by Judith Butler. Are these informing any of the text, or are these things that you haven't read yet and you're looking to read in future kind of thing, or what am I supposed to take from the presence of these titles here?
So I just finished Gender Troubles a couple months ago, and I'm in the middle of Second Sex. And so these are just like, I kind of just listed off just like a ton of books that I've read that have helped inform my ideas, or like, yeah.
It's like a list of influences.
So a list of influences. Yeah.
So I guess I have the immediate question then. If you've read Gender Trouble, and this is something I'm having a little bit of difficulty sort of reconciling with the text itself, there are major passages literally right in the beginning of the book that I don't see really being engaged with in the article, that sort of directly contradict in a very, I think, persuasive and well-structured and efficient way a lot of the theses of the article itself. So, for example, do you have like a physical copy, or are you using like an e-copy?
Audiobook.
All right, see, that's your problem. Good luck with Judith Butler as an audiobook.
Yeah.
It's really hard to listen to.
Yeah.
Because I have to rewind it often.
You would. I would. Okay, so if that being the case, I would strongly recommend go back to chapter 1 and go to section 2, the compulsory order of sex/gender/desire. It's literally a page and a half, actually about 2 pages long, and it's directly like contradicts in a very compelling way that I think you need to engage with, more or less your entire framing here in a really strong way. I can read it out for you if you like, and you'll see what I mean. Okay. Is everybody okay with that? I don't want to be super boring to everyone's audiences. Are you fine with that?
How long is it?
It's literally 2 pages, but I can do it fairly efficiently.
Real quick. Real
quick. All right. This is from Judith Butler's The Gender Trouble, section 2 of part 1, the compulsory order of sex/gender/desire. Although the unproblematic unity of quote-unquote women is often invoked to construct a solidarity of identity, A split is introduced in the feminist subject by the distinction between sex and gender. Originally intended to dispute the biology is destiny formulation, the distinction between sex and gender serves the argument that whatever biological intractability sex appears to have, gender is culturally constructed. Hence, gender is neither the causal result of sex, nor as seemingly fixed as sex. The unity of the subject is thus already potentially contested by the distinction that permits of gender as a multiple interpretation of sex. If gender is the cultural meanings that the sexed body assumes, then a gender cannot be said to follow from a sex in any one way. Taken to its logical limit, the sex-gender distinction suggests a radical discontinuity between sexed bodies and culturally constructed genders. Assuming for the moment the stability of binary sex, it does not follow that the construction of quote-unquote men will accrue exclusively to the bodies of males, or that quote-unquote women will interpret only female bodies. Further, even if the sexes appear to be unproblematically binary in their morphology and constitution, which will become a question, there is no reason to assume that genders ought also to remain as two. The presumption of a binary gender system implicitly retains the belief in a mimetic relation of gender to sex, that's like a mirrored relation, of gender to sex, whereby gender mirrors sex or is otherwise restricted by it. When the constructed status of gender is theorized as radically independent of sex, gender itself becomes a free-floating artifice, with the consequence that man and masculine might just as easily signify a female body as a male one, and woman and feminine a male body as easily as a female one. This radical splitting, I'm almost done. This radical splitting of the gendered subject poses yet another set of problems. Can we refer to a quote-unquote given sex or a given gender without first inquiring into how sex and or gender is given through what means? And what is sex anyway? Is it natural, anatomical, chromosomal, or hormonal? And how is a feminist critic to assess the scientific discourses which purport to establish such quote-unquote facts for us? Does sex have a history? Does each sex have a different history or histories? You can mean this both socially and biologically as well, because we're, of course, as evolved species, historical. Is there a history of how the duality of sex was established, a genealogy that might expose the binary options as a variable construction? Are the ostensibly natural facts of sex discursively produced by various scientific discourses in the service of other political and social interests? If the immutable character of sex is contested, perhaps this construct called sex is as culturally constructed as gender. Indeed, perhaps it was always already gender, with the consequence that the distinction between sex and gender turns out to be no distinction at all. Last paragraph. It would make no sense then to define gender as the cultural interpretation of sex if sex itself is a gendered category. Gender ought not to be conceived merely as the cultural inscription of meaning on a pre-given sex, a juridical conception. Gender must also designate the very apparatus of production whereby the sexes themselves are established. As a result, gender is not to culture as sex is to nature. Gender is also the discursive/cultural means by which sexed nature, quote-unquote, or a natural sex, quote-unquote, is produced and established as prediscursive, prior to culture, a politically neutral surface on which culture acts. It's sort of like just kind of a naively given fact you can just take on as just sort of a given. This construction of sex is the radically unconstructed. Oh, sorry. She's going on to talk about her other theses there.
I don't know if anyone processed any of that. Were you following that, Tom?
Okay. Well, here's the problem.
Just say in plain language, please, please, please. I love you so much, please.
You okay? You just want me to on the fly just put an entire paragraph by Judith Butler in play? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
The concept.
From what I understand, she's saying that we're already categorizing sex into a binary unnecessarily, and that it wouldn't necessarily that we are just now choosing to categorize gender then in a binary according to that sex, when if we did otherwise, we would be like where she says it, like gender would be free flowing instead, and kind of or a lot more malleable.
Well, no, the point is, if it is not actually the case that when you assign X, Y, and Z traits to the category woman, that this actually encompasses all the people who identify as women, which, by the way, would prevail even if we limited women to just people who had vaginas, because of course there are women who want to join the military, there are women who want to stay at home, there are women who are artists, there are women who are mechanics, etc., and so forth. There are also, incidentally, women who are not trans women without vaginas or ovaries or things like that. Then we actually aren't universally describing the category woman at all. In fact, we are actually not representing that category appropriately because we are necessarily excluding them, supposedly in the name of representing some common unity between them. If indeed it is the case, as it seems to be from that example, that gender does not actually track to any one of these common features, which are because they're not common, then therefore it also doesn't logically follow that the range of genders, since they don't correspond to biological sex or to chromosomes or to things like that, the range of genders may actually exceed the range of sex designations. Moreover, how we identify the range of sex designations is itself also gendered. Case in point, intersex people are typically sort of excluded from the discussion as like a statistical aberration. They're very, very unlikely. However, they still exist. If you're trying to make a universal statement and you have contraries that exist, the universality of it is belied. The same can go for like any number of other things. Same deal with like quote unquote masculinity or femininity as measures of the degree to which one corresponds to what one in some context associates with, like a certain concentration of testosterone or a certain concentration of estrogen, or like just someone who matches sort of some mental model of what a man or a woman is. Nobody's actually going to measure up to this thing, and many who by some set of arbitrarily sort of amalgamated measures, they're going to fall on some and they're going to succeed on others. You're always going to fail to actually accurately represent them. These are not actually representatives of an actual like concrete type that is not part of some specific cultural imaginary. So that being the case, to kind of insist that gender is downstream from sex inevitably, when sex categorizations are themselves expressions of culturally assumed gender categories, is a little bit preposterous. Case in point, like you refer in this essay to chromosomes, and of course, like, well, I mean, there's even variation there, but you require like specific organ pairs with different partners in order to reproduce. That seems to be a fact of sexual reproduction. However, the manner in which we have hyper fixated on these as the specifically relevant descriptions of a person's social type is itself begging many questions. Once again, not just are there aberrations in terms of like the construction of these of the bodies that perform these sexual roles. There are intersex people, for example, but there are also people who are able to fulfill the sexual roles in principle, but either lose their organs due to incidents or to some kind of deformity, or for whatever reason they just are not so disposed to enacting that role out. And why on earth should they be forced to? Why should that define their category in society or anything else above the bare incidence of having those features? We don't categorize people similarly in terms of like height or width or whatnot, stuff like that. But an actual point of fact, we have in the past, like we've made similar categorizations based on like physical features like skin color, class, etc., and so forth. So like it becomes like extremely question begging to just simply insist that gender must be in some sense downstream from sex, just because in present day there is a prevailing notion that there is some intimate association between the two in all cases. That may be the case culturally. We hyperfixate on sex as kind of like the site of gender distinction, erroneously, or at least a lot of us do. But that is in no way a reason to think that therefore these things are actually descriptive of the same thing, or that one is inevitably downstream from the other. That could just be a prejudice in our given culture.
Yeah, I think I'm totally open to that being the case. I think I don't think that we really have evidence that that is the case, or overwhelming evidence that that is the case. So like there's a part in here.
Wait, can I, before you answer, is it weird if I ask Kid to say what his thought is on that? And
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it is. I mean,
well, too bad. I wanted to know before we lost, before we went on. Is that okay?
Well, I don't want Tom to get too lost. I don't want him to feel like he's
No,
being
no,
dominated conversation.
Yeah,
I think
that's my problem is I don't want to
No,
like
it's
overload.
Okay, true,
a
true,
bunch of
true.
shit.
no,
Okay.
no,
Oh,
it's
oh,
good.
You were like Tom is at, and then because I have other points about the bipolar system,
Okay, cool.
Mhm.
which I think will relate, but I don't want to like overload on this point.
Okay, thank you.
Well, so I was gonna say there's a point in here where I don't know if I address that directly, but let's see. It says, and currently we have very little evidence of gendered characteristics that are biological, meaning the differences still exist, but only in small ways. The extreme ends of the gendered spectrum are likely small differences between the sexes that have been over exaggerated over time and socially reinforced to pressure everyone into performing the most exaggerated version of themselves. Hulk Hogan in a 50s style housewife would likely never happen without gendered expectations widening the spectrum more and more exaggerate the small differences between the sexes. So I think that it makes sense that there is a that there is like
Sorry,
well, I was,
go on, please.
that there is somebody who births and then somebody who inseminates. That, like, you know, evolutionarily, it makes sense that there would be some differences between these two. I just believe that we've greatly over exaggerate those differences. It's not, but I do believe that those differences exist just in very small ways, and then turn into much bigger differences because of how complicated our society has become.
Okay, but here, so immediately the problem you run into is that that's actually your kind of the lodestone by which you're determining gender identities, and what you're effectively saying is that the various aspects of Hulk Hogan's appearance, traditional masculine or whatever, his muscularity, his mustache, his choice of dress, his occupation, things like that, this is all an expression of insemination. That seems very reductive. It also seems to be very incorrect because there are, of course, even cis women who engage in the same sport and the same vocations, have the same social roles, and so on and so forth.
I
Well, I
think
don't
that's
think most of the things by Hulk Hogan are actual representations of insemination. That's what I'm saying. Is I think what Hulk Hogan has become is a bastardized version of what masculinity would actually be, without all of these pressures over exaggerating what the male sex is inherently.
Can I ask a clarifying question, Tom? So you are, when you said that you do not think that this is like a, yeah, you said that it's like not the biggest part, like it's an aspect, but it's not the biggest part, is what your position is, right? Or am
What do you
I
mean?
of
What's
by
an aspect?
of like the inseminating person and the I forgot what the other person was.
I'm just saying that
Like it
every
affects,
animal.
but not like, but
I'm
it's
saying most
less.
animals have a male and female, and that there are differences between them biologically or evolutionarily, and that you would assume there are going to be small differences between males and females. We just over exaggerate those
Right.
differences.
Okay. So you're saying that it's over exaggerated. So you are, I'm just not sure if President Sunday knows what your position is exactly. I'm not sure if he's assuming that.
Well, here's the thing. There are going to be necessarily, just because of how sexual reproduction works, there's going to be functional differences in terms of like the role in reproduction of people who possess one set of organs versus people who possess another. But when we're talking about gender, we aren't strictly talking about reproductive role. And the reason why people like gender abolitionists and feminists and so forth exist is because, for various reasons, largely historical, we have tended to assume a large aggregate of specific social roles, including dress, how you are addressed, your appropriate station, based upon role in reproduction. And that seems to be fundamentally incorrect on some level. Among other things, there's infinite variation and crossover between the two, and even the sex distinction itself is blurred because it is the product of an organic process that is not itself actually purely binaristic. It is the case that there appears to be, like, once again, like a binary set of conditions for reproduction, but that shouldn't be defining of categories of persons in societies of intelligent beings that have like a social existence as well as just merely a biological one.
So what else would it be?
Gender?
Because yeah, so like when I think of like the differences, I'm thinking of women who happen to be like they have estrogen, they're a bit more emotional, are more sensitive. Men have testosterone, they're going to be more aggressive.
Well,
and
slow down, cowboy. How about this? What if you have a very we can even include physicality in this if that helps make it clear. What if we have a very timid, sensitive, sort of like caring, nurturing person, very fair features and so on and so forth. In contemporary terms, you would not be able to distinguish them from the average cis woman on the street, but they have a penis and they are technically biologically XY chromosomes, and you have a woman who is muscular, a cis woman who is muscular, active, sort of very, very enterprising, very bold, very commanding, a lot of like traditionally male traits and things like that. And you are picking which one of them you want to send to war. Which one are you going to pick?
I guess the one who's more traditionally masculine.
Well, there you go. So this person is gendered in a male way, but very much not male in terms of their sex. And this is why you need the distinction, because the two do not follow from each other. Moreover, we can imagine, like, let's remove humanity from the situation altogether. We can imagine like those same gendered categories being predicable of like if our species had required 3 or more different biological sets in order to reproduce, or less, same deal. But the category of gender would still be completely appropriate. It just wouldn't be tied to biological sex. And the argument is that it's not, for precisely that reason, because we see people who fall into these social roles not because of their biological properties, or not because specifically of their sex properties.
Yeah, you understand that I'm saying I don't believe that the roles are because of sex. I believe that there are some small parts of gender that actually are because of sex differences.
This is what I meant. I'm sorry that I'm a little stoned and I couldn't explain it very well, but this is what I meant. I don't think.
No, but you're insistent. But you're insistent that gender is always going to be tied in some specific way to sex differences, whether or not it's minor or major. It's going to be always related in some sense to sex differences. Is that correct?
I don't know of another option or another. Yeah, I don't know of another option. Yeah, of course.
Okay, but I've just given you one though, where sex is not determinative at all of the attitudes of these two people. And these are examples that abound in real life.
They are bound in real life, but those aren't actual patterns within real life. Those aren't things that we see as often from.
But that's kind of immaterial, because the bare fact that there is like on average like a certain common trait does not mean that is determinate, right? That doesn't mean that is like definitive of a category of person. That just means this category of person may be a little bit less common. But when we're talking about like gender, especially when we're insisting that gender is downstream from sex, we're actually kind of insisting that in some sense your biological sex characteristics actually determines your social role in some way. It determines in some sense your proper vocation, your proper dress, etc., etc. Like that's a necessary consequence.
Yeah, so you're saying it's not necessarily tied to sex. And I agree, it's not necessarily tied to sex, but just as far as I can see, it's tied to sex. But I'm open to the possibility of it being something different, or that the patterns don't exist at all, or that they aren't tied to anything at all, except for social pressures. It's just as far as I can see, they just seem to.
Well, social pressures is a really big one. Social pressures may have resulted in the person with the ovaries being the more appropriate one for war, and the person with the testes being more appropriate for like like less violent activities.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's conditioning. That's not sex. Like
Well, that's what I'm saying, is I'm open to that being the case. Like, I believe that it's likely that it's probably at least about 80% of what we would consider gender is likely social conditioning and that the rest of it might be like very loosely connected to sex.
Sure, but that becomes a statistical claim. Then you're saying that on average, this is how the cookie crumbles. But the feminist or the gender abolitionist argument will be that this oughtn't to be how the cookie crumbles, and this can be interfered with through socialization and things like that. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. It just means you're not really speaking to the category of gender at all, except for noting these are the prevailing notions of gender in contemporary society. But what forces?
Yeah, for the most part, I'm explaining it from a pragmatic view, and then saying why I believe that is the pragmatic view. But
what do you, when you say pragmatic view? What do you mean by that?
I mean, like, pragmatic, like within linguistics, like like the way that we, or based on what it is that's actually being communicated.
Language is used, stuff like that.
Yes.
Okay, so the problem with that, though, is that language itself is going to be a cultural construction, and the available genders are going to be radically different depending on the sort of like categories that are sort of taken for granted within that language. If we have the wherewithal to challenge linguistic norms that gender people or things in certain ways, then that notion of pragmatism is precisely what undermines the essential connection of gender to sex, because we've already imagined ways in this very conversation in which we can talk about it as being completely not rooted in sex and yet still be a completely valid type of categorization. You see what I'm saying?
I do. I do think that at the root of it, it will still end up connected to sex in some ways. I think that even the socially constructed parts are, again, just over-exaggerated things that aren't really necessarily connected to sex. They were just, they were just over-exaggerated.
Why? But why?
Because men happen to build muscle more easily, and
that's not true. I have a tremendous difficulty building muscle. That muscle mama person on YouTube, she's much bulkier than I am.
Well,
very much.
I'm speaking in generality.
Yeah, you said generally though.
Yeah, but
I think generally it is true though, right?
Yeah, probably it is, but that doesn't get us anywhere. Like it
does, because we're recognizing patterns, and so the patterns are going to be generalities.
Oh, I understand that, Tom, but consider this. If you're in a situation where the majority of people with every single person from birth identified as having particular organs on the outside of their bodies, vaginas as opposed to penises, are forced to stay home, not to learn to read, not learn to ride horses, not learn to fight, etc., etc., then you will enter into a situation where there's a radical physical disparity between people with vaginas and people with penises, and radically different appropriate vocations for those people based on their social conditioning. That is not necessary and does not actually set an example to suggest to us that in all cases the classification of persons actually must in some sense be downstream from their biological sex characteristics. That simply doesn't follow. This is a specific case of particular cultural practices that produce these patterns. No, what I'm saying is that the cultural patterns may be what produces the regularity that you're citing as evidence for their inevitability.
Okay. Yeah, but I'm not understanding. Why wouldn't it be? It seems to be the case that yes, if testosterone is going to be if it does make it to where we build muscle more easily, if it does make it to where we're more aggressive, if estrogen does make it to where people are more emotional and where they are more sensitive, then it does seem as though we have two ways of categorizing these phenotypes.
But you know that you have both, right? Like,
that's what I talk about in the thing, is that I say it's on a spectrum because you always have a mix of both. You have a mix of feminine and masculine characteristics. Everybody does.
So, but like estrogen represents the feminine, and are you saying that like literal the literal hormones in your body affects what your gender is?
Yeah, I'm saying the literal hormones in your body, in your brain, that are affecting the way that you think and the way that you act and your personality. Yeah, I would say that.
Except when it doesn't, because once again, we have women who are more suited to the military, and we have men who are more suited to domestic life.
But that's not the norm. That
It doesn't matter if it's the norm. If you're trying to make the argument that gender must always be downstream from sex, you're making a universal claim. If there are manifest exceptions to the universal claim, it's not universal.
I address this in the document to where I say, like, there are always going to be social pressures that can completely push you away from what it is that is likely to be a biological drive. The biological drive only means that you are more likely to do X. It doesn't mean you are necessarily going to do X or you will never do Y.
No, I understand, but you make statements to the effect of, like, women are more sensitive, therefore they are driven to wear less comfortable clothes and things of that sort.
I don't say that.
You did say that verbatim because I thought that was weird.
I do not. I say that I start that paragraph off by saying it is likely that women wearing those things is just socially reinforced, though it is a possibility. And then I go down a line of logic saying that it is possible that these things could be linked up with biology, but that we assume it is socially constructed because without evidence of biology, we will always assume the social construct. And in these cases, we don't have the evidence of biology. In most cases, we don't have that evidence.
It seems you're operating a bit of a circle in that you gender the sex differences in order to derive the gender categories from them after the fact. You insist that particular biological sets must necessarily result in certain like social manifestations of a very particular kind, but you only arrive at that by insisting upon some aspect of that being present in germ in the initial sex characteristics by themselves, which you only justify again by reference to the general outcomes. But what is specifically being challenged here, Tom, is that your description of the process by which an infant becomes one of these gender categories, that is specifically what is being scrutinized here. Is that your assertion that it's due to some kind of innate feminine drive stands in need of justification. I don't think you provide it in the article.
Wait.
I think that, like,
I don't even think people are questioning whether or not testosterone helps you build more muscle.
No,
or makes you more
aren't.
Aggressive.
They aren't. We aren't at all. But being more aggressive and being more muscular is not the definition of being a man. Case in point, Muscle Mama is a woman. I'm not there for a woman because she has a better propensity towards muscle building than I do.
You keep doing this. I'm not understanding. Of course, we're only talking about patterns. We're only talking about what is more likely. That is the only categorization. The categorization.
But what is more likely is contingent on the circumstance.
Correct.
You're making a universal claim when you say that gender must always, in some sense, relate to sex.
I don't say that. I don't say that. Again, this is what I've been trying to explain this entire time. I think a very small amount of gender actually links back to sex.
No, but every gender links back to sex is what you say. A small amount of it links back to sex, but
a small amount of characteristics, like whether or not you carry a purse, is feminine, but it doesn't link back to sex, right? You just happen to carry a purse, or whether or not you wear a dress, whether or not you have long hair. These things are considered feminine characteristics, but they don't necessarily link back to your sex. These are just socially reinforced things, and I would assume that is by far the majority of things that we consider gender.
But you define the feminine, though, as that which is expected of that which produces a large gametes, leaving aside for the fact that for the vast majority of human history we didn't know what the fuck gametes were.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, what you're saying essentially is that these are vagina-like fashion trends. This despite the fact that these are mostly trends that originated with men, for example, and vice versa.
And I mentioned that in the document.
You do. There's discordance here between these claims.
Are you saying maybe meaning?
I am saying that these things change over time, that it is not all biological, that most of it is not biological. Most of it is not connected to sex.
No,
Most of it has
Tom.
literally
We all
nothing to do with your sex.
Tom. Listen. We all understand. You're not following what I'm saying here. So what you are saying is of gender, regardless of which gender we're talking about. See this pie chart. This is gender. Okay, tiny little sliver. That's sex. Okay.
Yes.
But it doesn't matter if it's this gender or this gender or this gender or this gender. Tiny little sliver.
Okay.
Sex. That stands in need of an argument, and simply saying that testosterone helps you grow muscle does not get you to every gender category must be related to sex.
Wait,
because
Tom.
First of all, hang on, one sec. Okay. Because first of all, once again, like when we're talking about like these signifiers of the feminine, of the masculine, and whatnot, as you just adequately pointed out, these do not refer to sex. So when you insist that these must refer to sex, you're literally just leveraging the fact that at some point historically, these were associated with certain external characteristics as opposed to others. This is a cultural distinction. You're not actually making an argument in favor of the idea that gender must always be downstream to whatever degree from sex.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes. I'm saying that one way or the other, there will always be some characteristics that are more likely of a sex, and that is what we will call gender. But that's all I'm saying, is that even if it ends up just being building more muscle, that will be the only gendered characteristic in the end. If we end up like eliminating all gendered characteristics that have nothing to do with sex, and the last thing left is just whether or not you build more muscle, then that will be the last gendered characteristic that is still called gender.
Tom, wait, hold on. President, I just want to... Jesus Christ.
Go on.
Chill. I'm just trying to clarify what Tom means when he says this stuff, right? Okay, the audience that you're talking to, like a lot of your audience is more like on the conservative side, right? Or like people that you're talking to aren't necessarily like trans rights. Like, not that they're not specifically, but some of them aren't. Because I'm thinking a thing, maybe it's related to the lens that you're looking through and that President Sunday's looking through reads different than maybe necessarily what you mean. Is that possible, or am I just misreading it?
I'm not sure. I think we're kind of getting to that point right now where I'm explaining that I only think something is considered gendered because it connects to your sex, and that we could eliminate all other characteristics and only have one or two left in the end, and they would still just be called gendered characteristics because they are the phenotype of your sex. They are just patterns that align with your sex.
But that doesn't follow, though, because you can have maybe the most socially relevant roles are not related to sex at all. Maybe, for example, what's more valued in society is whether or not you fit the role in terms of your action and your behavior and your attitude and your aptitude for things like combat, leadership, domestic work, mechanics, etc., and so forth. And we may find that under certain conditions, maybe optimum conditions, that there actually is not even a slant between these two. I rather suspect that's unlikely. Nature doesn't draw in straight lines, and neither does history or society. But that's a possibility. And insofar as it's a possibility, if you're going to say that gender must necessarily resolve to sex, you need to provide an argument, not just the assertion, that sex must necessarily infiltrate into every single possible gender category that could be arrived at.
I don't believe it does, though. You keep saying that, and I keep saying I don't believe it does. I believe that it actually has to do with very few gendered categories.
Okay, but when you...
I'm saying, hold on, the only reason that it connects to sex is because that is the pattern that we recognize. That's it. That is the only reason it connects to sex, is because we see the sex, and we see the pattern align with the sex. So it is it is just a pattern based on sex.
Yes. No. But it's a pattern based on sex that is downstream from culture that is itself not necessitated by sex. I
agree. I'm not saying it is necessarily because of sex. It just aligns with sex. That's what it makes it gender. It just happens to align with sex.
No, but that's not what makes it gender, though, Tom. We distinguish gender from sex specifically because people insisted that gender was downstream from sex, that gender necessarily relates to sex. But the entire point is that it doesn't.
I understand, and I mentioned in the document that, like, yes, people overly push the two into the same category.
No, but our
then-
difference, no, but Tom, our difference is not of degree. This is what you're not understanding. I'm not saying that you go too far. I'm saying that you're actually categorically wrong. You're attaching a thing to something else, essentially, that is not. Like you're just doing that. We went over the entire document. Am I crazy? Kid not kin, Aiko, am I like off base?
I'll let
No, I
Kid
don't
take
think
it.
so. No, I don't think so.
I'm not even understanding. So if tomorrow women at like 25% of women own fish tanks and start raising fish, and 75% of men own fish tanks and raise fish, we will call that a gendered characteristic. That is a masculine characteristic. Has nothing to do with their biology. They just happen to do that more often. That is what makes it gendered.
Well, we won't though. Case in point, for example, there are height disparities on average between biological females and biological males. We do not classify height as a gender thing. Not intuitively. There are some people who do, surely, but that is not like a universal at all. And so that statement that therefore, because on average, statistically, we discovered more women, or we even tended to observe more biological females have fish tanks, less biological men have fish tanks, or vice
I
versa.
completely disagree with what you just said. I think we definitely consider taller women to have like what we would consider a masculine height. Yes, for
What?
sure.
But why-
No, that's not. Hang on. No way in hell. In fact, it's almost a trope where the woman is specifically categorized as taller. For example, like wearing clothing that increases height, accentuates like litheness of form and things like that. That's a specifically feminine thing. It's not more masculine.
But being too
Once a
tall.
woman is around like 6 foot, we would consider that masculine for sure. They are. We would say you are tall for a woman, or
That's a social
or you are-
expectation. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
A social expectation that you should be wearing heels but not be taller than the man that you're with because you're emasculating him.
Mhm.
See, I speak Tom's language sometimes. I can interpret. That's what he's saying. I'm
I
not
played
saying he's
basketball
right.
for a long time, like with women, like that we definitely considered taller women to have like a masculine height. For sure. I think anything that aligns with sex, that it just fits a pattern that aligns with sex, is something we consider gendered. That is the
What
I
if
wanted
ice
to,
cream? What if? Oh, sorry, go on, kid.
Sorry, yeah, I wanted to that. I mean, this is actually really a really intriguing conversation. But sorry, I'm not like butting in as much because I'm just kind of like hooked. But I did want to pick your brain about something just because it was something that like I found while reading this, is that like this idea of, I think this is like a fundamental thing where you have this difference between masculinity and femininity, and they're posed as two opposite ends of this like bipolar spectrum, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that that's actually the case, that masculinity and femininity are opposites of one another, or that they're different and we perceive them as opposites of one another?
I don't think they're necessarily opposites. I think that we have patterns of one group of people and patterns of the other group of people.
So then if you had something that was less masculine, would that thing be more feminine?
Yeah, I would imagine, or not necessarily. So like computers being on computers used to be a masculine thing. Over time it became less masculine, and now it is not more feminine. So I think generally, if something is gendered at all, yes. But as soon as it stops becoming gendered, no. Sometimes things just stop being gendered.
Yeah, but doesn't that like undermine the entire like bipolar spectrum that you laid out before, where you have like masculinity on one side, femininity on the other side, and then you have what I think you probably should have said androgynous, or in the middle, right? So the things that are like androgynous, are those things actually in between these two sides of the spectrum, or is it just this totally other thing that happens to not relate to these two different concepts?
I don't think it's possible for somebody to not have masculine and feminine characteristics. So I'm not sure.
To not have, so like if we're talking about a specific thing, like we can, here's an experiment that I want to try with you, right? Because like when you talk about masculinity and femininity, these are things that like are all have to do with like human perception, like how human beings are expressing themselves, right?
Mhm.
But like we can think of masculinity and femininity in ways that don't have to do with human expressivity. We can think about like, what do you think between a spoon and a fork? Which one's more masculine? Which one's more feminine?
I don't think there is one.
You don't think there is one?
Mm.
Well, if you ask people, if you poll people on whether or not they think a fork or a spoon is more masculine, they're going to say that a spoon is more feminine, that a fork is more masculine.
Or
most people are going to make these distinctions here.
Or they might just say a spoon is more feminine and deny that like a fork even falls into the thing. Like there might be something about a spoon that signals to you as being more feminine.
Right. I mean,
but
we could go
yeah.
further than just these utensils, but you can look at other forms of objects. Cars, for example, right? We know what a masculine car is. We know what a feminine car is. These are really, really obvious. And it's not necessarily just the fact of whether or not like more women drive them or more men drive them. There's particular things about like the shapes of these things, whether or not they're rigid shapes or smoother, rounder shapes, if it's softer colors or more intense colors. These things are all going to be gendered as well.
Mhm.
But like these are referring to different they're relating to the concepts of masculinity and femininity different. Not so much that they're in a spectrum, but like a spoon might be like it'll be rounder, softer than a fork, which could penetrate you with more rigid shapes, etc. And so like, but we can have objects that are non-gendered, right? We can have objects like I don't know what gender you would give spaghetti, but it probably not a gender
Non-binary.
at all. So I think we're constantly trying to fit people into an understanding of these categories as this like bipolar system, when it's not necessarily as such. That there could be things that you could wear which aren't actually gendered, but they're more so gendered just because you're wearing them, right? Where like if you had just like a rag over you, if you were just wearing you just wrap yourself up in like a blanket or whatever the fuck. Like people will gender it just based on you being gendered already, right?
Yeah.
You agree?
Yeah, I completely agree.
Okay,
so yeah,
then
so it's
things
like
would
kind of
exist
like what I
outside the gendered spectrum.
sorry.
So then things would exist outside of the gendered spectrum,
Yes, of
including
course.
aesthetics, etc. Right?
Yeah, but I there aren't many that actually exist, right? So there aren't many actual aesthetics that aren't more common of one or the other that somebody wouldn't consider feminine or masculine. So like even like short hair, generally we consider that to be a masculine characteristic. Longer hair is going to be a feminine characteristic, but not necessarily. And it's even the way that you do the hair, right? There's like different types of pixie cuts that are going to be more feminine, even with shorter hair that almost look exactly like a man's hair. But normally, if it's on like a feminine looking person, we automatically consider that hair to be feminine only because it's on a feminine looking person. So I think that there are
What about like can you imagine a feminine beard?
I think there's like have you ever seen, I forget what movie it is, but there's a movie of like a circus woman, the woman with a beard who actually has like a very feminine looking beard where she has like beads in it.
Yeah,
and
beads and
all
braids
sorts of
and
stuff. Yeah.
like that, right?
Hey, chat. If you haven't
so
liked
like
the
this is something
stream,
which actually
please
exists
do.
within both things, right? It's actually referring to both like concepts.
Also,
both
has
of these
the
social
volume
concepts
level
at
on
the same
everyone.
time, actually. They're referring to the masculine concepts at the same exact time that they're referring to the feminine concepts. Right?
You're saying, well, yes, it has different aspects of it that are going to be both feminine and masculine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing too, right? But like,
what do you mean?
Huh?
What do you mean?
It's the same thing. It's the same object.
Yeah, it's the same object, but there's different aspects to the object. Like there could be smell, there could be how how clean it is, how what color it is, the like you said, like but whether or not it has braids, like all sorts of different aspects to the thing, it's still a beard, but different aspects to the beard are going to change the way that we categorize it.
Yeah, so like the only thing that I'm really pointing at here is not necessarily that like some things can have both or whatever, but like if we're talking about gender in this like bipolar way, then we're necessarily describing a through line between the both of them. But if you have gendered characteristics that don't refer to like, you know, one has this characteristic and the other one lacks that characteristic, then you would have a through line. But like if you have something where it's like femininity means maybe like let's see. I feel like there's so many things of like gender which is just perceived as oppositions, or that one has this thing, one necessarily doesn't have this thing. But there's just all of these examples of things that like either can have both feminine and masculine at the same time, or have none that we can identify. It seems like masculinity is its own concept that we're constantly referring back to, that femininity is its own concept that we're constantly referring back to, and that there isn't actually this like you know, the less masculine you are, the more feminine you are, or something.
I
like
agree as far as like different traits go. Yes, I completely agree as far as traits go. So like when we're talking about like a computer or hair or cars or things like that, I completely agree. But as far as people go, I think that we're always going to match them to one of these categories and gender them. Like based on the patterns, we are going to overall conceptualize them as one or the other, or we're going to have trouble categorizing them at all, and to us they'll fall into the middle.
I think that's fine. I think that I feel like we're gonna have to pick this up at a later time. I'd love to talk to you one-on-one, but I have like so many things going on right now, and so I'm gonna have to dip out though.
Yeah.
Damn. Okay.
I feel like this would be worth returning to at some point when we haven't been going over this for. I'm approaching the 10th hour of my stream.
Yeah, of
Jeez
course. And I'll
Christ.
probably go back and watch whatever you guys went over, and then yeah, it'd probably be easiest if you guys want to talk about this stuff one-on-one. Anytime you guys want to have a chat, just hit me up, because I stream pretty much every night.
Sure, yeah, for sure.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for coming on, Tom.
Cool.
Sunday
Sorry, Aiko.
cool,
I feel like you were kind of sidelined a little bit. I didn't mean to do that. Did
Oh,
I was
no,
gonna ask
I-
before.
What?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You're muted, Aiko.
Shit.
Uh-oh.
Hello.
I was gonna ask before I go. Did you have anything?
I was just I brought us all here together today because I thought it would be very interesting to see how both Kid and President Sunday would interpret your doc. I didn't read it before today, and I have been very interested. I think that sometimes, maybe a lot of times, people think you mean the opposite thing of what you mean, but also I might be wrong. So
Maybe.
Rip me.
Yeah, I think that a lot of, like, I had a whole debate with Lav recently where, like, the entire thing was her trying to tell me that she thinks I'm being prescriptive with my language about gender, and me trying to explain, I don't think I am. I think I'm just explaining what it is, or what I believe we are observing and how we observe it. But if you asked me for
a lot
a
of people are going
prescription,
to see that as prescriptive. There's not much that you can do about that, because like people's idea of gender is going to it's in itself prescriptive to people when they're like, all right, for me, I want to be seen in this way or this way, and then you make an argument of like, well, people see it this way or people exist this way. Like, to them, it sounds like you're making a counter argument, right?
Mhm.
It's always going to be seen as prescriptive to a lot of people, and in a lot of cases it does sort of like relate itself to other prescriptions. I
Mhm.
don't think it can completely be like disconnected from that.
Well,
Is
and
going to
the
have
people who
ethical
are
implications.
prescriptive use language like this is what gender is. Instead of saying this is what it ought to be, they already say this is what it is, aiming for it to, like, to convince people of what it is that they want it to be.
But
If
you
I may,
did that
says,
too. Like that was like in writing, in the way you wrote it. So sometimes it was a little confusing to know what was what. That's all.
Sunday?
if I may, as just a final note, there is a tendency for when people deploy or even just inherit, so schemas, like the fact of sexual dimorphism, where you do require two distinct sets of gametes to reproduce and things like that. There is a tendency when people are operating within a system that in some sense either assumes the schema at some level must play a factor, to try and relate everything to the schematic. We see this in a bunch of different fields. So for me, a big problem that I deal with a lot is that a lot of people just sort of assume naively that like something like the nation state or the state or the nation or stuff like that, that's just sort of like a given category that you always have to contend with, that when you're talking about politics, you're always talking about the qualities of this thing called the state. And one of the things that's really frustrating is, while there is definitely a discursive mode, just because that's like a prevailing concept in which you can productively talk about like states, the behaviors of states, just based upon how people act about them, there's a tendency to then assume on that basis that therefore this is sort of like an essentially given thing. There's something about this that's rooted in reality and not rooted in convention. Or not merely rooted in convention, if you like. And I would say similarly with respect to the insistence that, like, let's not worry so much about the extent to which any gender must take part in sex, and let's talk about the non-binary question in the first place. You make a very interesting decision to situate the non-binary as being essentially between the two, as if it's a mix essentially of masculine and feminine. But it doesn't seem to me like you've actually justified that thing. It seems to me that by insisting upon these poles as being sort of like the actual, like the thing which actually determines gender sort of categorically.
I don't want to interrupt you guys, but I
Yeah.
do gotta go.
All right.
Bye,
See you, kid.
kid.
See ya. Bye. It was
Everyone
fun.
go follow kid. I'll link in chat.
By assuming, here, let me move myself over here so I'm not taking up two spaces. By assuming that these are the two poles, it seems intuitive to say, oh, well, that which is not either must be somewhere in the middle. But at no point did you conceive of, for example, maybe it's just completely outside. Maybe it actually doesn't relate to these two at all. And maybe what's sort of potentially triggering like an intuitive sense that these must relate is the prior assumption that when we're talking about gender, we are in
Eva.
fact specifically talking about, in some
How
sense,
are you doing, chat? Like the stream
attributes
if you haven't.
of
Thank
the
you.
average penis bearer or something like that, or vice versa with other things like that. I would strongly suggest scrutinizing that a little bit, because I think there's some underlying assumptions there that are kind of slanting your reasoning process in a way that doesn't necessarily follow, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, I think I
And
do
read
justify
Butler.
it.
Don't use the audiobook, for the love of God.
Okay. Yeah, I do think I justify it in there, or at least I attempt to explain why I do that. But I the only it comes off from like talking to non-binary people, the way that they talk about their gender identity. It every single one of them kind of talked to me about it, and then I kind of tried to conceptualize it myself, and then went back to everybody and said, okay, so if I said it being non-binary meant that you had a mix of both feminine and masculine characteristics to the point that you could not easily identify as one or the other, nor easily be identified as one or the other, would you agree with that? And every single one of them just said yes.
So here's a methodological
yeah.
problem in your approach there, just very quickly.
Yeah, of course. I understand the methodological.
No, but very crucially though, just as like being a member of an ethnic minority doesn't therefore mean that you have like a greater grasp of like history or anything. Like it may tend on average to give you some advantages epistemically, but just because you're like a part of an ethnic minority, you don't necessarily have a greater grasp on things like theory of racial emancipation or the history of a particular group or the economic and social circumstances of like that particular group or whatever. There are a million different social like factors that can make you aloof or ignorant or whatever. Similarly, the bare fact of being non-binary doesn't necessarily mean that you have like a firm grasp on these specific theoretical distinctions or these specific scientific distinctions. I can't speak for it and tell it that to speak to you directly, but somebody who I think would be very competent at explaining this, who actually is very grounded in theory and stuff like that, I would recommend. They can it can yell at me if they don't like this at all, but I can recommend shooting Doe a message and seeing if it would like to chat with you on
I
this,
don't
because I
know.
think it would do a fantastic job.
Yeah,
I don't know if it will say yes, and I apologize if I've stepped too far. But
we've talked about having a conversation a couple of times, so
yeah,
we might do that. But okay, I appreciate it, guys.
All right. Well, good to see you, Tom. Thanks for chatting, and yeah.
Appreciate it. Later.
Have a good
Bye.
night.
So I didn't really have anything to contribute to that so much as I wanted to see what Kid and President Sunday, how they would interpret his communication style. And also they read it aloud, so I didn't have to read it aloud.